The day after the race in Montreal, Argentine forces surrendered the Falklands capital of Port Stanley, ending the Falklands War, and a few days later the Argentine dictator General Galtieri was removed from power and subsequently tried in a military court, and democracy was restored to Argentina. Saudi Arabia also had a new leader with the death of King Khalid and the accession of his brother King Fahd. He was one of 45 sons of Ibn Saud, the founder of the nation, and the fourth of 6 to become King of Saudi Arabia. Back in Britain, the royal family was enlarged with the birth of Prince William, the firstborn of Charles and Diana, following their marriage the previous summer. A couple of days earlier, prominent Italian banker Roberto Calvi, known as God's Banker for his close ties with the papacy, was found hanging from Blackfriars Bridge following a number of scandals, including involvement in Freemasonry, alleged money laundering for the mafia, and many more fanciful ones. A British Airways Boeing 747 flying over Java flew into a cloud of unexpected volcanic ash and suffered an abrupt failure of all 4 engines. Captain Eric Moody made a famous announcement to passengers saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have a small problem. All 4 engines have stopped. We are doing our damnedest to get them going again. I trust you are not in too much distress." They managed to get 2 of the engines restarted and headed for Jakarta Airport, but the windscreen was so sandblasted by the ash that they had to land entirely on instruments. Captain Moody, clearly a man with a way for words, described it as a bit like negotiating one's way up a badger's arse. They landed safely, the crew were given awards, and they even made it into the Guinness Book of Records for the longest glide in an aircraft not built for the purpose. On the subject of flight, Larry Walters of San Pedro, California, tied 45 helium weather balloons to a lawn chair and took off, planning to float over the Mojave Desert and then use a pellet gun to burst a few balloons and give them a gentle descent. Instead, he rose to some 16,000 feet, drifted over Long Beach and into the approach lanes to the airport. He shot a couple of balloons but then dropped the gun. The chair descended again, getting caught in power lines and causing a blackout, but not harming Larry, who landed safely and became a minor celebrity known as Lawn Chair Larry. Over in Spain, Scotland had been eliminated from the World Cup after an agonising fumble gifted a goal to the USSR, and the match ended in a draw, but England and Northern Ireland had both topped their groups and were now in a second group stage, needing to beat Spain and France respectively to make it to the semi-finals. There'd been controversy on the last day of games in Group 2, when West Germany and Austria met in Gijón. The other pair of teams in the group, Algeria and Chile, had met the previous day for their last game, so going into the match, both the German-speaking teams knew that a 1-0 win by West Germany would see them both through. Horst Hrubesch put the Germans ahead 10 minutes in, and the remaining 80 minutes saw both teams simply gently knocking it about and running down the clock. Fans of both sides were unhappy, but those of Algeria, who would have advanced for the first time otherwise, were absolutely livid. For future World Cups, the last matches in the groups were always played simultaneously to avoid this happening again. While all this was going on, there was much political toing and froing in the F1 world as FOCA tried to arrange a Grand Prix to replace the cancelled Argentine race earlier in the season, and ended up with a Dutch Grand Prix out of its usual August slot and held at midday on a Saturday, about the only time in the TV schedules not taken up by World Cup-related programming. Patrick Tambay would make his Ferrari debut at Zandvoort, and local hero Jan Lammers returned to the cockpit of the Theodore for his hometown race too. Nigel Mansell was still recovering from his broken arm, so Colin Chapman turned to the Lotus team's test driver, young Brazilian Roberto Moreno, to fill in the meantime. Roberto Moreno was a childhood friend of Nelson Piquet and had followed him into motorsport, winning the 125cc karting championship of Brazil in 1976 before heading for the UK and Formula Ford as a one-man team in 1979. A few good results and a good word put in by Piquet got him a bit of support from the Ralt team, then a works drive for Van Diemen in 1980. He won the British Formula Ford title in 1980 and placed well in other European series, which brought him to the attention of Colin Chapman, who offered him a Lotus test contract, which gave him enough money to step up to Formula 3, and he also won the Formula Pacific 1981 Australian Grand Prix from pole, leading home Nelson Piquet. Brabham were finally confident to put both drivers in a BMW car once more, while in Italy a large storm had caused severe damage to the Alfa Romeo team's home base, and 2 of their race cars were damaged beyond repair, so they would be attending the race with their spare, plus a 1981 car dragged out of storage, and would hope nothing went wrong. With Tolman back and Ferrari up to full strength, pre-qualifying also returned to whittle 31 cars down to the regulation 30, and once again Emilio Di Viotta was the victim, nearly a full second off next worst Jarier and some 6 seconds off the eventual pole time. Zandvoort kicked off a run of high-speed circuits, and to no one's great surprise the front row was all Renault yellow again, Arnoux taking his 4th pole of the year. Piquet and Pironi were next up, then Lauda the top non-turbo in 5th alongside Tombe. Rosberg and a trio of Italians in the shape of Giacomelli, De Cesaris and Patrese made up the top 10. Warwick, having breezed through pre-qualifying, then parked his Tolman an impressive 13th, but things were going very wrong at Ligier, where both Lafitte and Chiva were having problems with the JS19 car, and eventually Lafitte qualified 21st in the old JS17 and Chiva had to sit the race out. Returning homeboy Jan Lammers brought up the rear, while Roberto Moreno, having barely sat in the tricky Lotus before race weekend, Nigel and Elio did most of the actual testing, struggled manfully but was bottom of the heap nearly 7 seconds off pole. The lights went green and the two Renaults raced away, going into the first corner Tarzan almost side by side, but Prost held the corner and took the lead, with Pironi coming through in 3rd. Piquet meanwhile was sluggish off the line and dropped back to 7th. Tombe had also had a good start, and as the cars filtered through the infield section it was Renault, Ferrari, with Lauda, Giacomelli, Piquet and Watson all giving chase. After one lap the lead trio were pulling away from Tombe, who had Lauda climbing all over the back of him. On the next lap Arnoux fell behind Pironi, while Prost began to stretch out his lead. Piquet, meanwhile, had used his turbo power to make his way up to 5th, which became 4th at the end of the lap as he passed the Ferrari with relative ease, to the undoubted glee of the BMW engineers. Lauda tried to follow suit further around the lap but couldn't make it stick. It soon became clear that Tombe was holding up the drivers behind him, while up front Pironi was hanging doggedly on Prost's gearbox. At the end of lap 4 the Ferrari pulled out and took the lead, beginning to pull away almost immediately. Whatever the Ferrari's boys had done to the car, including but undoubtedly not limited to a new front suspension setup, seemed to be doing the trick. Further back, the queue behind Tombe was the scene of some fierce racing as Lauda, Giacomelli and Rosberg all jockeyed for position, with Patrese keeping a watching brief behind and Derek Warwick still going well in the Tolman in 9th. Rosberg made his way through the pack to be right behind Tombe at the end of lap 10, while Giacomelli also dropped behind Patrese, and Warwick pulled off with an oil leak his race run on lap 16. On lap 11, meanwhile, Rosberg had managed to outbrake Tombe into Tarzan and also began to pull away. Meanwhile, Piquet had got right up behind Arnoux and pulled past with relative ease to take the place. A lap or two later, on lap 22, Arnoux braked for Tarzan, only for his left front wheel to snap off and send him hurtling into the tyre barrier at some 120 miles an hour. The luckless Rene was lifted from his car in some pain, but thankfully unharmed. Piquet charged up to and overtook Prost just before half-distance, so it was Pironi leading Piquet by about 20 seconds, with Prost just behind Piquet, then another 14 seconds back to Rosberg, with Tombe another 10 seconds back in 5th, with Lauda behind. Behind him were Giacomelli, Daly and Watson. Prost departed the race with the by now inevitable Renault engine failure on lap 34, joining De Cesaris in the pits, who was in to retire with electrical issues. Lauda finally got past Tombe, but it seemed unlikely that he would be able to catch and pass any of the cars ahead of him. On lap 47, Tombe lost 6th place to a charging Alboreto, just as he was also lapped by his teammate Pironi, but the race had rather settled into a procession by this point. Rosberg put on a charge, closing on Patrese's Brabham, and was helped by Alboreto, who tangled off camera with Daly, bumped across the grass, then balked Piquet while regaining the track. Didier Pironi cruised home to take his 2nd win of the season and put himself just a point off the championship leader John Watson, while Piquet managed to hold off Rosberg just long enough to keep 2nd. Lauda finished a lowly 4th, Daly was 5th, and Mauro Baldi benefited from Alboreto's impromptu motocross to nab 6th and his first career point. Championship leader Watson finished 8th, a lap adrift, but would still go into his home race at Brands Hatch leading the title race, but now both Pironi and Rosberg were within 1 win of his points total.